And yet the queen remembers him and calls and tells Belshazzar about him, calls him to Belshazzar's remembrance. Now he's called for, and he has the opportunity to be restored. And listen to what Daniel says to this man. Daniel, I think, has in his old age, you know, a lot of folks, don't do this when you get old. Don't become a compromiser just because you get older. I know a lot of men that have stood for right and done right all their lives, and toward the end of their life, I had a fellow that was an old preacher. I've had several fellows that are old preachers say, you just get tired of fighting sometimes. You just get tired of, you've done the fighting and it's time for the next generation to do it. Well, that's okay. Pull yourself off the forefront and don't fight, but don't cave in either. And don't compromise. Don't ruin a lifetime of work with a few compromises. And many men that have been greatly used of God have done so all the way up to the end of their life and then compromised everything they believed in the last couple of years of their life. Don't be like that. Don't do that. It doesn't have to be so. Well, here's Daniel, and he's getting along in years, and he's aged. Obviously, he's gone through several kings and has been around a long while. He's in his upper years, and he's been placed to the side as not relevant or not important. But when things get really serious and somebody needs to know God, they go to the person who's always known God and has been consistent about it, and that's Daniel. So here's Daniel brought to the scene, and it's interesting, Daniel's attitude is not one of peace and ease. He doesn't come in and say, well, this is a chance for me to get back to where things will be good for me and I'll be respected and treated well, and maybe we could work things out so that I could become in charge of the kingdom and God could get some respect around here. Daniel just preaches the truth. Listen to verse 13. Then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. So here's the king flattering Daniel. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof, but they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. Don't forget about who you serve. Don't forget about who you serve. Here's an individual that thinks that he can exalt Daniel. Here's a person who thinks that he can, if you will, excite, I guess, the greed or the avarice of Daniel to the place where Daniel will do what he wants because he's going to make him somebody. And Daniel's got enough experience in life to know Belshazzar can't make him somebody. It's God that made him who he is, and he doesn't need Belshazzar, he doesn't need Nebuchadnezzar, he doesn't need any of the czars at all to put him into a place of being somebody. It's God who's God. Daniel understood from the beginning why it was that he was a captive in Babylon. He was a captive in Babylon because of God's hand of judgment on his people, the Jews, and God allowed him to be in a place of relative ease in comparison to the rest of the captives. And Daniel understood that the God of Israel was the God of Babylon as well. He was the God of Nebuchadnezzar, whether Nebuchadnezzar recognized him or not. And Nebuchadnezzar could not exalt Daniel or threaten Daniel. Do you remember the threats against Daniel? Hey, if you don't eat the king's meat, it's going to be my head. And it's going to be your head. And Daniel said, well, the problem with it is that we can't sin against God. And his friends, Hananiah and Azariah and Mishael, well, if you guys don't bow to this image that represents the king, then you will have to be thrown in a furnace. And those men said, well, maybe you can take our lives, maybe you can't take our lives, but one thing we know for sure is that God is able to protect us. He's able to deliver us. And so here Belshazzar says, I'll exalt you, I'll promote you, you're going to be number one man, and I'm going to make you rich. And Daniel says in verse 17, before the king, let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I'll read the writing and unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. Daniel said, give yourself some gifts, and go ahead and exalt somebody else. But I'll read it to you. And it's interesting that he doesn't just immediately read the writing on the wall. Before that, he says, but King, you need to hear something, and I want to tell you. And Christian, can we make some application here tonight? Could we say that the things that Belshazzar needed to know about the Most High God are the same things that you and I need to recognize about the Most High God? If it was true then, is it true today? Yes, it is. O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. First of all, Belshazzar, I want to tell you who made Nebuchadnezzar king. You want to know who made your grandfather king? God did. You know what that means about Belshazzar? It means that God let him be king too. Unless you and I should exalt ourselves above measure, could we be reminded that our success is not ours? And that God cannot be blamed for our failures? God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to be king. And did not just allow him, but He made him king. And if God wants to, He can make us whatever He wants us to be. And it'll be His privilege to do so. And our privilege to be part of it. And then he says, and for the majesty that He gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom He would, He slew, and whom He would, He kept alive, and whom He would, He set up, and whom He would, He put down. He said, let me remind you about a little idiosyncrasy of your father/grandfather Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar could do whatever he wanted. He could exalt somebody, and he could take them right back down. He could let someone live, or he could say the word and take their life. He could do whatever he wanted. Everybody, anywhere in the world. There was nothing in the world that Nebuchadnezzar could not do. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly crown, and they took his glory from him. Belshazzar, when Nebuchadnezzar put himself where God belonged, God took him down. Where do you think this is going to lead? Here, Belshazzar has taken instruments from the temple that are dedicated to service of the Lord, and he has used them for service to himself and his concubines. And he's put himself in a place that belongs to who? God. Do you know that Belshazzar doesn't receive the same kind of treatment that Nebuchadnezzar did? Belshazzar does not receive the same treatment that Nebuchadnezzar did. I think that's interesting, don't you? I mean, couldn't God have made Belshazzar go out of his mind? Or just force him to bow himself and acknowledge that he's God? And God didn't. Daniel said, Belshazzar, you can give your riches to who you want to. You can exalt who you want to. Don't bother exalting me, and I'll tell you why. A couple of reasons. First of all, Daniel didn't care about what an earthly king could give him. He cared about what a heavenly king thought about him. So it didn't matter what Belshazzar did or didn't do. He wasn't giving him a message from the Most High God because of what he could get for himself. He was doing so because the Most High God told him to, and because that was who he served. Belshazzar was willing to be servant to a great earthly king. But he was willing to do so because he was servant to the Most High God. Did I say Belshazzar? I meant to say Belteshazzar, Daniel. And I'll tell you why it is that Belshazzar didn't get the message, your kingdom's going to be taken from you and given back. It's because Belshazzar had history. Belshazzar had history. You ever had somebody, you ever heard this phrase or ever used this one? Well, he may have told you not to, but he didn't tell me.